一场的主题演讲，我们很荣幸邀请到来自芬兰的Seikkula教授来为我们演讲。Seikkula教授专精心理治疗，同时也是临床心理学家以及家庭治疗师。他一直专注于研究精神病，同时致力于写作。他出版了11本书，其中2本更是翻译成15种语言。今天他所要为我们带来的讲题是新时代心理健康照护下的开放式对话。Now we will start our keynote session. Our first speaker for today is Dr. Seikkula. He is a professor of psychotherapy, also a clinical psychologist and family therapist. Dr. Seikkula has also been active in writing. He has published 11 books, which 2 of them were translated into 15 languages. His topic for today will be open dialogue in the new era of mental health care. 那么现在呢，我们要请我们的引言人、社团法人中华民国咨商心理师公会全国联合会的罗慧群副理事长来为我们做引言。Please allow me to invite our moderator 慧群罗 Deputy Managing of TCPC, to give us some remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a warm welcome.
大家早安。好，谢谢有这个机会哈，然后让这个伊甸基金会来邀请我来这边跟大家来做一个在我们Jaakko老师开始来跟我们讲这个开放式对话之前，我先来分享一下我自己的一些经验。那因为我需要拿出我的手机来计时因为我这个人话比较多，我是一个心理师通常这个话一讲下去就没办法收了。我有跟主办单位确认过我大概有10分钟的时间。可是我觉得有点久因为我比较希望说大家能够有更多的时间跟Jaakko在一起。好，我第一次见到Jaakko的时候是2015年的时候，那应该是Jaakko第一次来到台湾那我分享一个小秘密因为Can I say ？OK， 他点头了，因为他应该知道我要说什么就是我们在那一次的工作坊就是在接收了这么多很震惊这开放式对话在芬兰所施行的一些状况。那晚上呢就是不免俗的，我们一定要带我们的讲师去享受我们这个台湾很棒的美食，对不对？对吗？大家？我希望大家能够清醒一下OK 好，所以我就跟着那时候是吴希娟老师举办的这个 workshop。我就跟着老师，就跟着Jaakko就走。希娟老师就跟我讲说Jaakko说他想要去跳舞。大家没反应？Sorry OK 好，这样可以比较 OK 一点Jaakko说他想要去跳舞。这个我有点惊讶因为一般我们在看到这个讲台上的这些大师们大概都会有他一定的样子，对不对？好，然后我就想说，哇，跳舞我的天哪，我好久没跳舞了就从我年轻到现在，好久没跳舞了。那Jaakko就说，我们就去找个地方喝点酒跳个舞那我们就找了一个蛮古早的一个餐厅为什么叫古早呢？因为它有 live band， 它就是演奏一些这个老歌我们就随着那个音乐呢，我们就好像变得我们入境随俗的跟着Jaakko去跳舞了因为平常大概我们晚上不会去做跳舞这件事情那个让我想到一件事情在Jaakko那一次的工作坊里面我听到他跟我们分享一件事是，当他在做家族治疗，或者是在跟这些我们所谓的 schizophrenia 的病人在工作的时候，他会去感受他身体的状态。例如说，大家今天早上吃早餐了吗？一定有些人没吃，所以现在肚子有没有很饿？没有，好，或者有没有想睡？还好。我不晓得大家有没有这个经验因为大家都是第一线工作者，我不晓得在各位的工作经验里面有没有些时候，当你触碰到一些你自己生命的一些议题，或者当你看到对方展露出生命的一些光芒的时候，你的身体会不会有一些变化？我看到有一些人点头，那没有点头的，我就先假设你还没有吃早餐，所以你的身体的律动大概在你的胃部那个让我有一个感动是，我们在跟我们 坐在我们对面的人，或者跟这样的一个团队在工作的时候，我们身体的反应，我们整个人的互动，其实是相当非常重要的一件事情。那我就再回到我在跟Jaakko在那边跳舞的时候，就感觉到，对啊，我可以很近距离的观察到Jaakko他就是一个身心也许灵性都是非常整合的一个人。这个让我会想到他在他的书里面讲到，是我们身为一个专业人士哈，这个可能今天会有很多的挑战的观点哈。身为一个专业人士，我们到底要不要在病人面前，或者我才刚刚跟我旁边这位 Leslie 说，我今天不太想再用病人这2个字来称呼 schizophrenia 的人，我大概我就称呼他就跟我们一样嘛，跟我们一样这些人，他们在跟我们在跟他们工作的时候，我们可不可以有那样的一个感受，是我们可以很自然的、很透明的、很自在的，不用管说我是医师，我是心理师，你是一个病人，你是一个精神疾病的人，好像有一个分别。我的专业我们自己讨论，因为开放式对话有一个非常重要的一个原则是透明，是打开，是对话。那个对话不是我把我自己的专业藏起来。不是我把我自己所想的藏在我专家的身份里，而是能够真的跟你们一起讨论我在想什么，我在思考什么，我希望可以怎么样一起来合作。这个对我来说是相当不简单的事情。我相信我们在座有很多应该也是当了一辈子的专家，对不对？没有是好，那太棒了哈！因为我们今天最不需要的就是专家。我们今天最需要的是，我们现场有非常多第一线的工作者，有非常多有经验的，我们也有我们的所谓的这些有生病的。好，我一直讲错话哈，我不应该讲生病，对不对？就是这些跟我们比较不一样的人，或者他们在这个社会上因为 schizophrenia 的一些症状而被不对等对待的人，啊，这个对我来说是我会希望我们的语言上可以再多一些调整。好，讲完这个人的感动啊，再来我想要再多提一点点的，就是说，在Jaakko的这个 Open Dialogue 的工作里面，我其实有非常多的想法。那当然，因为时间的关系，我大概只能列举一点点哈。因为我之前呢，在这个台北市康复之友协会啊，也跟他们合作了，去做了一个开放式对话的团体。那对我来说，能够运用开放式对话在我们目前的精神医疗哈，所谓的社区复健机构里面，我们所接触到的大部分都是慢性的病人。好，这个大家应该也很有感觉。我们所接触的大概都是已经生病好久好久的病人，而且也已经使用非常长期的精神科药物。那个对我来说，可能就跟Jaakko老师他所说的是在急性期啊第一次发作的时候，我们就能够立即的用开放式对话的精神下去做所谓的帮助的部分。不过在会前，我跟Jaakko老师也稍微讨论一下啊，其实在他们一开始做这个开放式对话的时候，当然也会碰到像我们现在碰到的困境。我们当然不见得一定碰得到急性的病人，可是慢性的病人，或者是他已经有这样的症状很久的人，我们能不能够用开放式对话的精神，一样的帮忙他们？我认为是可以的啦。不过今天当然Jaakko老师在这里，我会更期待多听到他在跟我们分享一些他当初一开始，如何在转换这个精神医疗系统，或者如何去突破这些困境。那我也非常感动的一件事，就是当每一个人的声音都能够被尊重的时候，其实它就可以产出非常大的力量。我相信今天在场这么多的贵宾，这么多的工作者，这么多的我们的这些有思觉失调症的这些人们，我相信今天会是一个非常好的机会，让大家可以把我们的声音通通的说出来。大家有这个自信吗？大概只有刚刚是就前面，大家有这个自信吗？我们今天来到这边，我非常的期待哦，就是Jaakko真的非常难得能够来台湾，然后我们真的有这个机会，非常近距离的去表达我们内在的声音。无论你是一个专业工作者，你是一个生病的人，你是一个家属，在 Open Dialogue 里面，它其实强调就是说有一个叫做同声复调的这个部分哈，大家应该有看过那个书吧？有吗？大家都有买书吗？好，没有买，今天也没有卖哈。 如果刚好我们今天我早上有看到有人在签名了哈。Open Dialogue 里面讲到同声复调是我非常喜欢的一个部分。它讲求的是什么呢？我们在工作的团队里面，每一个人都有每一个人的声音。精神科医师有医师的声音，心理师有心理师的声音，社工师有社工师的声音，我们的 OT 也会有 OT 的声音。然后每一个人的纵向，我们的内在有没有更多我们不同的角色所带出来的声音？比如说，我是一个爸爸，看得出来吗？看不出来，谢谢谢谢哈。我是2个女儿的爸爸，好，女儿早上去上课时还问我说：“爸爸，你今天穿西装要去哪里？”我说：“我今天要去参加一个非常特别的一个会议，是我非常喜爱、非常兴奋的一个会议。”他就问我说：“为什么你会这么兴奋啊？我没看过你这个样子。”我就说：“因为在这个地方，我知道我所说出来的任何一句声音都会被尊重。”也会被接纳，更会被理解。我相信这个会是今天Jaakko老师会带给我们很震撼的一个 seminar。然后我也非常的期待大家都能够好好的运用这个时间，我们来一起跟这么多的国外的学者专家来一起讨论属于我们台湾在地文化，我们如何可以更开展我们在精神医疗上的一个转变。那Jaakko最后我想说的是，在Jaakko的这个 presentation 里面我想一个叫做rethink our job, our work， 重新去思考我们在精神医疗里面所做的工作。那我也非常喜欢先摧毁再重建。大家有没有这个概念？我们要盖一栋新的房子的时候，我们要先想办法把旧的房子的一些东西拆一拆。隔间拆一拆，我们才好去重新的创造出一个更适合我们台湾社会可以使用的 Open Dialogue。好，谢谢大家。
接下来我们要邀请来自芬兰的讲者Jaakko Seikkula教授来为我们演讲。And now we would like to invite Dr. Jaakko Seikkula to come up to the stage to speak to us. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a warm welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for the very warm welcoming words and the opening rituals. I have to say that I have fell in love with Taiwan, and I'm very pleased to come here many times. I also have fell in love with the Taiwanese food, and of course I fell in love having danced in Taiwan. So dialogue is dancing, and it's dancing in terms in what the people in need for help introduce us. It's not the dance in which we as a professionals are the one who are leading, but we are the ones who follow the steps and try to adjust our ways of being into the movements, into the misery, into the problems that our clients are telling and putting in front. And dancing, of course, is a good metaphor, because nowadays I think that dialogue is not only speaking, but it's a very bodily actions in which we come to near together, and while coming to near together we start to understand our lives much better than we are used to think. I will start this presentation by showing you some outcomes of the dialogical practice. And now when I speak here about open dialogues and dialogical practice, I mean a practice in which all who are involved in helping others come together in open meetings, and everything that is needed to take care are discussed in these open meetings, and all the decision, what shall we do, is done in these open meetings. Professionals comes together instead of having the professional single meetings with their clients, and the one who is in most need for help, and the family, and the other part of the social network, and working together as long time is needed. That's shortly what I understand of open dialogue. Later on I will say some more words about it more precise. But in my work, when I used to first 20 years of my career working as a clinical psychologist, it happened in Lapland in Finland. And during that time, 1984, we started to organize this type of work. So more or less, I've been, in my way of understanding the clinical life, is based 35 years on this. And we have done a lot of research about these ideas. And one of the research has focused on looking at what happens with the people who for the first time have psychotic problems in their life. And we had 3 inclusion periods in this research, and I have very shortly put in front these 3 periods. The first one was between the years 1992 to 1993. We were part of a Finnish national study where there was a comparison between psychiatric units who used the neuroleptic medication in a usual manner and compared to units who adopted this open and dialogical way of working, and the neuroleptic medication was not started in the beginning. The idea of this research was look what is the role of neuroleptic medication in treatment of psychosis. As you see, we already in that project get very surprising results. We realized that only 25% of the one who we call patient used the neuroleptic medication, most of them not, and 84% came into the full employment after that. This is very different compared to what we are used to think within psychiatry. Then we decided to go on with this research to have more experience, and that was a research project that happened 1994 and 1997, and coming out even a bit more better outcome. 90% of the people who were suffering some kind of psychotic problems within 2 years were back in their active social life, working, studying, or actively job seeking. These studies have been very heavily criticized, and partly of this criticism that has been put towards these studies, and partly for our own interest, we repeated the same design 10 years after 2003, 2005, and I actually find out the very same results. 84% of the people were back. In all of these studies, about within the 2-year period, some 1/4, 25%, a bit more in the last part, used the neuroleptic medication, but main part of the people did not use the medication. And then last year we published a study in which we have collected together all these patients, 108 patients who were treated in this open dialogue in Western Lapland in Finland, and made a comparison to the rest of Finland who came into the treatment at the same time, 1,763 patients, and used the official registration information about mortality, about the use of services, and about the retirement rates, and found very surprisingly differences 20 years after, 19 years after. We found out that the mortality to illnesses is higher in the treatment as usual in the rest of Finland, but actually when we controlled the age, we found out that there is no differences, which means that in the dialogical practice, people come to search for help as younger compared to the treatment as usual. Actually, this is a very interesting point that happens there. The people were 94%, almost all of them had been hospitalized more than 1 month compared to 18%. They had ongoing contact in 80%. In 8 cases of 10, 19 years after, people still were using the mental health services compared to 28% in the Finnish Lapland. And on medication were 80% compared to 36%, and this is the most dramatic differences, while 60% were living on a disability allowance, were retired because of the incapacities compared to 1/3 in Western Lapland. And this difference is huge. And these differences are against the ideas of long-term follow-up within psychosocial services, because it is said that you cannot see any differences between the groups after 5 to 7 years, because there are so many mediating factors in the life that affects, and you can no longer say that it is actually that caused the outcome. And of course that's not the point here, because we do not have the control of what has happened with these people after 2 years treatment. So 17 years now they have been looking for services outside. We know that many of them have moved to live in other parts of the country. But still, even if they use the more traditional services after the first crisis they had, there is huge differences. So for me, this is a very interesting point. Something that happened in my life 20 years ago, the way that I was met, if I was met in a human, open way, in a dialogical manner, still was with me, even if I may have got new crises in my life. And this is quite amazing. And of course, it's a very big thought to us as clinicians, because it means that we do huge choices in the way that we organize the treatment when we meet with people in their crisis. If we choose to meet with people in a more dialogical or open way, in a more human way, it seems that we really open the door to take use of their own resources and that are much more empowered in their life, compared to the idea that we look at the people in need for help as patients with whom we apply different interventions. A year ago, I got a letter from a psychiatrist living in Barcelona. His name is Jordi Marfa. Jordi has a very long experience. He's a psychoanalyst also. And in this letter, he wrote to me that we met in a seminar in Madrid. And in this seminar, 1 year before he wrote, we had a discussion in a dinner table, and Jordi says that he had an impression that I encouraged him to start to work in an open dialogue way in his unit. And then he wrote, well, I did it. They collected a team, and this is a very basic idea. First basic idea of open dialogue, start to work as team. In this team, they had a social worker instead of, in addition to him, social worker, male nurse, and some meeting also the psychologist who is the psychotherapist. And he gives an example of a lady who came to their team because of having psychotic problems, having 20 meetings with her family and also sometimes with her friend. So this is another important element with open dialogue, always including the family, but also being open to meet with the other part of the social network that it is relevant. And then he wrote a sentence. The result is absolutely shocking. For a man, for a psychiatrist who has seen everything in the field, he still used this very strong saying. The result was shocking. In 4 months, they stopped medication. She returned to her studies. She got a driving license and now has a very different point of time. And this is what I see with people many times who start to work in an open dialogue way. Now, open dialogue has really spread into many countries. For instance, we have systematic training programs in open dialogue in more than 20 countries now. For instance, one of the countries is Italy, in which 8 provinces there is a very profound change taking. And many of the psychiatrists who work in Italy, they say the same, that they never could believe that the dialogical way really changed the results of their work in the way that it has results. So I think that in that way, coming into work in a dialogical way challenge our understanding of human life. And this is the very basic idea. How do we understand crisis and how do we understand human life on the whole? I have taken here 2 citations of a Russian philosopher, Mikhail Bakhtin, who for me is the main author of understanding the dialogical quality of human life and the power that is in dialogue. And I really follow the ideas that Mihail Bachtin is saying, that to live means to participate in dialogue. So our life is to be in dialogue. It's a very basic idea, to ask questions, to hear, to respond, to agree, and so forth. And then he says that in this dialogue, a person participates wholly and throughout his whole life, with his eyes, lips, hands, soul, spirit, with his whole body and deeds. So actually he's saying that dialogue is life. Aim of life is having dialogue. And that's what me is the aim of any treatment, if we call that a treatment, is to have dialogue, to understand what has happened in a life. And when this happened, so we have done as professionals what we need to do. And this is the very challenging part of the dialogue, dialogical practice, because as professionals we are so used to think that our task is to learn different kind of methods and interventions to have a control, for instance, the symptoms or the difficult way of life in which the people in need for help are. But if we follow the dialogical way of ideas, it's different, because dialogue itself is not a method, it's not an idea, but it's an aim as itself. It's like breathing. We know in the new research of intersubjectivity that when babies come into the world, they really has a kind of innate, let's say, biological capacity to be in dialogical relationship, in active dialogical relationship. This is very different compared to our standard of human life that we had 30 years ago. When we were thinking that, for instance, when I had my daughters, babies, we were thought that when they are smiling, something wrong in their stomach. And now we understand that this is totally fail understanding about it, because the baby takes active initiative to have dialogue with me as a father and with others. And it's as essential as breathing. When we come to the world, we need to learn two things. We need to breathe. We need to learn to breathe. If I don't breathe, I will die. And as important, when I come to the world, I need to be in dialogue. And if I'm not in dialogue, I will die. So simple is life. And it's this paradoxical simplicity that is so difficult for us professionals, because we think so much that we have to follow different kind of interventions, and the life meeting with people, even in a very serious crisis, is much more simple than we think. It's come to near to the people, start to follow what they are saying, taking it seriously, and do everything that we do in line of their in their experiences of life. In psychiatry, there is going on during the last 10 years big changes. The big changes has happened in the establishment of psychiatry, in the very top level in the national psychiatry. And it's a big part of this change started in the neuro research by American professor Nancy Andreasen and his study group, in which they came out showing that actually when they noticed that people with diagnosis of schizophrenia has a loss of brain tissue more rapidly compared to the people who do not have the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And trying to find an explanation to this, they actually found and asked if this is in relation of the pathology, deepness of the psychopathology, or if it is in relation of drug abuse, because people many times use a lot of drugs and alcohol to treat themselves, or if it is in relation to use of neuroleptic medication. And actually that was the only significant difference. This was more or less a shock for the researcher, because it was very much the opposite that we were taught at the 90s and at the 2000. And this is where I make this question that how do we understand human life is a very important step. If we understand human life, that is something that happens in our brains, and if we think that we can reduce mental activities in the brain, or if we think that we can reduce mental health problem into some discapabilities of brain, we are on the failed track. And this is not how human life is. Another remarkable outcome is also in the studies of especially in Finland, who have repeatedly shown that especially in multi-pharmacy, using many neuroleptic medication at the same time with the patients, there seem to be increase of mortality with a actually very severe outcome. So that in the establishment there is more openness to psychosocial intervention than it was before. I have to say here that I'm not open dialogue is not an idea that you should meet with your clients without medication, because open dialogue with an idea that you use all the sensible methods of care for helping if you think that they are necessary. But still the question that this over medication really seems to cause a lot of problems. Even so much that science journals 5 years ago published a paper that in treatment of psychosis, this talking cure is back now. So that it's not only giving medication for the clients, but it's also allowed to have psychotherapy and having family involved. And they referred to different studies. One of the studies is this Wundering and others in the Netherlands, who made a study of a group of first-time psychotic patients. They followed them 7 years' time, and after all the patients got a medication, neuroleptic medication at the start of the treatment, after 6 months, they were interrupted, and then they followed what happened with those patients, and finding out that the patient who stopped the medication had significantly better social and psychological outcome after 7 years. And they also refer a lot of these studies that we have done on open dialogue and some studies of individual psychotherapy. So different forms of helping with people in psychosocial manner has become very relevant. And for me, this makes very important questions about that how do we understand the thing that we call psychotic behavior. As a kind of a guiding idea for me, again, before going to this, I have to repeat that open dialogue is not treatment of psychosis. Open dialogue is to organize our system of care for any kind of crisis. But the most of the studies that we have done are based on psychotic problem, and perhaps also the question how do we understand psychotic problem is a kind of criteria how do we understand human life, and in that respect it's a very important to think about. I don't think that psychosis exists. There is not a category that people who have psychotic problems would be different from the people who do not have psychotic problem. But it's the opposite. Psychotic behavior can be possible to all of us if we are living in a serious enough situation. Many psychotherapists, for instance, are saying that if you have several simultaneous stress factors in your life, in the end you are like in a dead end, and this is the point of view in which your body find hallucinations, hearing voices, and some other form to react. So it's a more of a response. It's not an illness, but it's a strategy for our embodied mind to survive very strange experiences. And if we meet with, in the opening speech already was mentioned, the people who for the long time have had this type of problems. It's not a question that their illness would be deeper compared to the people who have managed to survive from the situation. No, it's a failure of treatment. And the failure of treatment in our system comes out of at least two sources. And the first is that our system of care is organized in the way that there is not access immediately to the treatment when you begin to start to feel some problems in your life. So this crisis intervention in many cases has shortened the time in which people are psychotic before they come to treatment. So many studies have shown that people may be psychotic between 1 to 3 years before they come to search for help, if there is no systematic crisis intervention services available in the area where they are living. So people have a lot of time to, in isolation, to find survival strategies that are not so constructive. And that's the thing that we meet when we meet with people who have problems that we call psychotic problems. It's not something that is a quality of their personality, but it's a survival strategy that they have done in isolation. And the isolation, that's the most dangerous issue. It's not the issue that you do not have medication or something like that, but the idea that when you start to feel, for instance, that I'm in a very big stress and I have a strange experience, I want to protect myself from human relationship. It's quite a natural reaction, but it's a very harmful reaction. And this isolation from the family, from the friends, from the colleagues in working place, that's the most risky thing. And everything that we plan should aim to stop the isolation. And of course, having the meetings as soon as possible is the core of the idea. I showed these outcomes of the research in the very last period of research. The duration of untreated period before people come to the treatment in Lapland was 3 weeks. And it's very different to start to search for help after 3 weeks hearing voices instead of being 3 years in isolation before you come and search for help. And instead of thinking psychotic behavior as an illness, so for me it's a response. Looking at what is it respond to is the most essential thing in meeting with people in the most serious crisis. To understand what has happened in their life and in what way it can be connected to the things that happened in the life. And there is a lot of research that has shown that hallucinations, half of the people may have experienced hallucination. And there is a lot of research showing that perhaps some 5% of the people may have very long-term experiences like that, and only 1/3 ever come into the treatment in any way. So most part of people with this kind of experiences are living without ever being in any treatment. For me, one point is very important when we meet with people who have this kind of experiences, to take it seriously, to stop saying that this is your illness and this is the reality, and to be curious. Wait a moment. What did you say? Did you say that you can follow the thoughts of your neighbor, as one young man said it? Can you help me understand a bit more about it? And this is the way we become connected with the feelings that and experiences they have with their life. In one way to make system like this is the thing that we call open dialogues. And it's not the only way, but of course it really has shown that if we make the new organization of the care, you may expect very different kind of outcomes in helping your clients that you were used to. It was first initiated in Lapland, in Finland. I was working there as a part of the team as a clinical psychologist. We had it's a very small unit. We had a very small hospital, psychiatric hospital, with 2 doctors, 1 or 2 psychologists, nurses, social worker, and so on. In Finland, we are very lucky because actually we have a very long tradition in psychotherapeutic orientation with people who we name as schizophrenia patients. Especially important has been the work of Professor Yrjö Alanen, who work in the city of Turku. Yrjö was a professor in psychiatry, and he also was a psychoanalyst. And with their work, they started to organize psychotherapy in public sector services. Then they realized that individual psychotherapy is not enough, and they started to organize systemic family therapy meetings with them. And in the end, they come into the conclusion that you actually need to adapt all the services into the unique needs of your clients. And of course, this is a very basic idea in the dialogical way, in the dialogical dance that I said here. Always adapt to the unique needs of your clients and choose the methods that are most suitable for us. And they already came into the idea that you need to have a forum to find out what are the unique needs, and they created the idea of treatment meeting or therapy meeting. In English, it's a bit confusion of the words, but still, idea that we need to meet openly with the team in charge and inviting the families. And when we heard about this 1984, we immediately thought that this is a way we also want to follow. Before that, in our small hospital, we also had adapted individual psychotherapy. We were very curious about systemic family therapy, but still we followed a very old-fashioned way that the team working in the hospital made the plans for the treatment without the patients. And we stopped this and started to work in an open way. And this was you may say, a kind of a revolution, or not kind of a revolution, it was a revolution. It happened 27th of August 1984. As in revolution, you know the day when things happened. And it was a day after we had a seminar in which we heard about the team who were working in Turku, and they introduced the idea, and we immediately thought that yes, this is something we want to do. And the next day we came to work, it was Monday. Our chief psychiatrist said that from now on, in every situation in which we make plans for the one who is hospitalized, he has to be present from the very beginning. And he stopped to have individual admission interviews, and thought that all the interviews that he is doing with the patient happen in the presence of the rest of the team, which is actually very important, because all discussions have the meanings for the nurses who are more in contact with the patients than the doctor or the psychologist. So everything started to happen in this open idea. And also we started to follow the idea that from now on we no longer think that we need to invite the families into the family therapy because of thinking that the family have some problem, but I started to follow the idea that in every case we invite the family to be part of the conversation, if they want or not, but still. And this actually changed our way of thinking, step by step, not immediately, but step by step, realizing that it's not a question that we need to make changes in the family, but it's the opposite. We need to have the family to help us. And if we learn to invite the people to come in this way, there will much less resistance to work together with the families. But if we have an idea that there is something wrong in the family that has produced the psychotic behavior, there will much more resistance to come into the meeting. Please come as we will change you. Okay. So it's quite easy to understand that people are not so keen to follow this idea. But if we invite people, please could you help us? They are more willing. All people are willing to help each other. And this is a very important case. Can you help me? Can you help us? And we need your help. And then we come together and start to make discussion. And as was already said, we started to follow this idea with all the clients. We did not any selections, but with everyone, with people who had been long time there or a certain time, or who were in a new crisis. We also got some problems. We actually got many problems. while doing this. The very first outcomes were very fascinating, that encouraged us to go further. This is also important. If we had had a very poor outcomes in the first open meetings, perhaps we had stopped, that this is not good. But luckily we got very good and inspiring and surprising outcomes with our clients about these open meetings. We realized that when we work in the hospital system is very rigid, and it means that the people need to wait all too long time to have time to the open meetings. One of the family could be hospitalized 2 weeks before we found time in the schedule to invite the family, and it's all too long. And then some 2 years after, we started to follow the idea that we have to have the meeting with the family invited before we decide if someone is hospitalized or not. We organized a team to be in charge of the meeting, calling those admission meeting. And what happened was that in this meetings, 40% of the referrals were dissolved. 40% of the people who had a referral to the hospital actually were not hospitalized, because in the meeting they started to emerge new ideas, and if the team proposed to the family and to the one in need that perhaps there is no need to come into the hospital, if you go back home, we come to you tomorrow, and they accepted that. That was also the first research project that we made in our practice. We realized that we need to reorganize the system, and then some years after, in the end 1989, 1990, we reorganized the system in a way that we dissolved main part of the hospital beds, and the staff who were working in the hospital started to move in the crisis intervention services, started to work in the crisis intervention services. There were a kind of network for crisis intervention teams in the area for the population to be available. And since 1990, we were in a situation in which we had a comprehensive community care system in which hospital was used, especially in acute crisis, in a very few occasions, and main part of the crises were taken care of by the teams who went home. And again, of course, psychotic problems are the minority of the crises. Much part of the crises are other type of the ideas. When doing that, we had come into the two conclusions. We started to think that we need to have some guidelines for the new practice, but we also realized that the training that we had do not give prerequisites for us to work, because we were so much thinking of these symptoms and taking care of the symptoms and only individuals. And therefore we decided that we have to have a training, 3 years training for all staff. And since 1996, actually, this type of training has been going on in Tornio. And this is also very important to realize when you think about the outcomes that I showed you in the beginning of my presentation. They come not by chance, but they are done by the most highly educated staff in any. I don't know if anywhere in public psychiatry services the educational level of the staff is such high than in Tornio. So there is a systematic education, and this is my message to psychiatry who has skipped the education. If you really want to have good services, you have to contribute with your staff in a proper training. Without that, it's not possible. It's not possible. You really need to invest a lot ongoing, continuous training or education programs. Another conclusion that we realized was that the outcomes in this new way of working were very confusing many times. For instance, we came into a dead-end situation in which we could not find how to go on. We repeatedly thought that this is the way to go on with these families, and the families said, no, we want to do this and that. And the outcome, dissolving of this dead end, came out when we changed our behavior. We started to, in some meetings, we could do different decisions, and after those different decisions, change started to happen also in the life of our clients. And this was very confusing idea to us to realize that when we change can start to happen with our clients. Because all our education is based that they have to change. It's the one who is the patient, he has to get rid of the symptoms. It's the family who has to change, who works in an inappropriate way. And all of a sudden we were in a situation in which we realized that we are changing. And after we change happen with our clients. As if the gaze that we have, it's turning into ourselves. And we realized that this is a very new way of working. We have to do evaluation, all the time ongoing evaluation, which actually has been going on since 1988. And this evaluation of the practice is the second big idea that we have learned. If you want to have new outcomes, new services, you really have to learn to evaluate your new practice. Without doing research, you cannot manage it. Sorry to say, but you cannot manage it. You have to do it. You cannot rely on the treatment of XLA's guideline. Actually, the treatment of XLA's guidelines in 90% are very poor because the validity of the recommendation is very poor in respect of the real life. And we are living in real life, and we have to learn to do the research in real life. One of the studies that we done, one of the studies I already showed you, that is all the time ongoing part, was Professor Jukka Aaltonen, who has been our supervisor, introduced an idea to have a study to analyze the patient records to find out what is the quality of this new system of care that has been going on some 5 years. There, I was also part of the study of Jukka. And then we actually read 3,000 patient records, all the contacts that had been done in 10 years' time between 1985 to 1994, and made a comparison when all the patients, for instance, because of their psychosis, were sent into the hospital compared to this new community care. And as making this qualitative content analysis of the stories in the new care, we came into a conclusion of the optimal element in this new community care system. So it's very important to repeat. This is not a description of the system of care in Western Lapland, but this is a kind of analysis of the optimal care in psychotic crisis. And what we found out was that the optimal care is something that introduces immediate help in crisis, which means that we organize our system in a way in which it is possible to meet with our clients within the first day after the contact has been made. So of course people may have had long time already problems because they made contact, but making contact already can open the door in a new experience of crisis. And this can happen in all new situations or with people who may have had problems 50 years before. 50 years is the longest interval in which we started to work with one family. So family relationships, for instance, never stop. They are there, and you may have a crisis even if you have had very long-term problems. Then we realized that optimal care is something that always includes in some way the perspective of the family, and in some cases also the rest of the social network. And that's why we named this as a social network perspective. Of course it is the family, but in some cases there are very good reasons to think about the fellow employees, to the neighbor, to the friend, and so on. Even if they will not come, they reject to come, but the idea, the perspective is there. What is the life living context in which our clients are living? And actually we learned that this we need to do before we go in the individual treatment. So that in the very first contact that we have with our client, we always ask who knows about this problem, who could be for help, who could be present if we come to you tomorrow morning. And then we can realize that, for instance, if there is in a family is a situation in which people cannot tolerate each other and we have to organize 2 meetings. Parents have separated and they are very conflictual situation and they no longer meet with each other. So perhaps we need to start to work in a way that we have 2 separate meetings before we come to introduce shared meetings. And then we start to make plans of the individual treatment also. But this is the way to organize, mobilize the social network, because we think that this is actually my very firm conclusion, that the resources for the futures are there. And how to mobilize the resources, and how to avoid make actions in which we isolate or we disconnect the people from their social relationships. Crisis is a possibility for all family members to learn new things. Also the father who has been very harmful for their kids can learn new things in the crisis. I have done about 200 follow-up interviews with the families because of different research, and this is what the people say repeatedly. One father said, in a crisis, I learned to speak. And without this crisis, perhaps I never would speak about what did I do wrong, or what feelings I had that I did wrong. And then the optimal situation is flexible. Response is currently the flexibility, so that we use all the methods of care that we see relevant. Open dialogue has not compensated any method of care, so it's not a method itself. We use people, some people really need medication. There is a lot of different kind of medications to be used. Some people can take use of individual psychotherapy. In some situations, the best option in the very beginning to invite the occupational therapist, you never know. In some cases, you really need hospitalization because of suicidal threat, thinking that's a part of the... So the flexibility is a very big part of this optimal care. Optimal care is something that takes responsibility and guarantees the availability of the people of the professionals, and also by going across the boundaries in that way, guaranteeing the psychological continuity of the care. And this actually led us into one very concrete advice that we gave to our staff. And I don't know how is the situation in Taiwan, but the Finnish system of care is very fragmented. There is services for any kind of problems, and there is all the time a kind of competition. Whose problem is this? And we stopped this. We said that it's no longer possible to say to the clients who make contact, this belongs not to us, you have to take contact to alcohol abuse services. No. But now the one who is contacted is responsible to organize first meeting. And in the first meeting, we make decisions who are the right ones to be in charge of the system. And when I was working, I give an example of my practice. I was working actually with, let's say, chronically ill patients who had been hospitalized for a long time. I did not work in the crisis intervention services. But sometimes some mother of some clients could call me, found my name somewhere, and describe of the situation of her son. And I knew that I'm now responsible for organizing the meeting. And then the mother started to tell that her son also has been drinking quite a lot. And I also started thinking in the telephone call that perhaps the problems, he does not sleep, he speaks with himself and so on, had something to do with the too much drinking. I do not say to the mother that you have to go to alcohol abuse clinic. But what I say is that, okay, when I listen to you, I start to think that perhaps your son's problems also could have something to do with the too much drinking. Would it be okay that if we come to you tomorrow morning, I invite someone from the A clinic to come with me in the team? And this is the guarantee in the psychological continuity, always going across the boundaries in the service system. And of course, one big boundary is between the community care and the hospital. going across the hospital boundary in a way that people who were working before the hospitalization by home visits also can participate in the meetings that are organized in the hospital, and also the opposite. If the nurse in the hospital becomes very important for this patient, why wouldn't it be possible that she continues also after the hospitalization? This continuity, psychological continuity, is a very important part. There is actually studies in which you can see that if continuity is not guaranteed, even good outcomes in psychotic can lead, and in 2 years after 80% have had a relapse, if the continuity is not guaranteed. So when you make plans in Taiwan to reorganize the system, please take care of the idea. How do you across the boundary between the hospital and communities? How do you make possible hospital staff to go home visits? And how do you make space for the community care or people working in the social care to come into the meetings in the hospital? Well, all these practical ideas, meeting immediately, always including family and social network, being flexible, adapting the different methods of care based on the needs, and guaranteeing the availability of by taking responsibility and going across the boundaries. Their aim is to introduce more safety for the family, to tolerate the situation in which there is no ready responses or ideas, to tolerate the uncertainty. And for tolerating the uncertainty, we aim at having dialogues in the meetings. And that is the relation why we name it open dialogue. Actually, with Jukka Aaltonen, when we made the analysis of coming to the conclusion of these 7 main elements of optimal care, we also thought how to name. Would we like to name this in some way? And we thought that perhaps we could call this open dialogues. It's open. Everyone needs to be there. It's open in a way that everything is discussed in the meetings. Well, everyone has a control of the discussion topics and decisions that are made. It's dialogue, and dialogue is open by itself, because in dialogue we do not aim at a conclusion, but in dialogue we aim at understanding and actually opening up. A bit opposite to the thing that we have been thinking, that we should come into the conclusion and decisions, but when we come into the dialogue, we actually are all the time opening up. And this is very different. Now for 20 years, my clinical practice has not been in the open dialogue system, but I can say that the family therapists that I meet, they are dialogical meetings. And once some 2 years ago, I was contacted by a man, 33 years of age. And he called from a psychiatric hospital in southern Finland. I was working in the University of Jyväskylä, who is also in the southern part of Finland, not in Lapland. And he said that he wants to ask if it would be possible to have a meeting with the family. His mother had heard about this open dialogues and knew me by name. And I said, of course. And but he said that we have a big problem, because in our family, mother and father, they have separated, and it's very difficult for them to meet together. Then I proposed that, okay, could we meet first with you and your mother, and then with your father? Okay. And then we had a meeting first with him, and they also had invited her little sister, 4 years younger, and a mother. And then sometime after, we had a meeting with him, his little sister, and the father. And just the third one was a shared meeting. But when they came into the third meeting, it was extremely tension-loaded. You can see in their bodies. When they came into the room, they only looked in the floor and sat down and could not breathe. And when they had sat down, the little sister said that, I'm scared to death of this meeting. This meeting should have been 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the parents had separated for the first time. After a while in the meeting, the mother said the same. This meeting should have been 20 years ago. And a lot of the issues that we discuss were very critical points towards father, especially the little sister had a lot of criticism of the father who has been absent very much to her life, and no abuse in a concrete way, but it's a very absent, and that was very painful for the little sister. And I, of course, became also curious and a bit worried about the father. In some point, I turned to him and asked that it seems that there is a lot of critical points. I wonder if this is good for you. And he said that I didn't want to hurt my children, but can we go on? Yes, we have to go on. So it was very painful for him, but in some way we managed to create a safety in us that it was possible. In some way we could tolerate the uncertainty that it was possible to proceed in the meeting. And after the meeting, when I asked, how was this for you? They said that this is so strange. In the meeting that we had in the hospital, it was terrible. Because in the meeting that we had in the hospital, the doctor only had an interest how mad I am and how disturbed our family are. But here, even if our life is hell, we feel respected and listened to. Even if we are in that big conflict, every one of us feel that we are listened and respected to. And they repeated this. We met some 1.5 years with 1 month, 2 months intervals. In every meeting they repeated this. And for me this is a kind of illustration of the difference between this open dialogue idea, dialogical idea, compared to the traditional idea. We really are not looking how mad is he, what is the symptoms, and what is the exact diagnosis. Diagnosis itself, it's an important part, but not in a way that would be a kind of definition of the treatment. But we are here to make all the voices heard and to understood. So this was in a way, more or less the starting point in which we started to develop, and nowadays it has spread into many different kind of contexts, and there is a lot of variation how the open dialogue practice has been put into work. In Norway, in Tromsø, there is also a team that is a bit in the same kind of situation, that they also have a comprehensive responsibility to take care, and they have been going on already more than 20 years time in their practice with very good outcomes. And then there are different countries. As I said, actually now I realize that there are more than 20 countries in which there are systematic trainings. This systematic training is a training including 16 to 20 seminar days. And then we also have a 3 years training, which is more or less like kind of psychotherapy in open dialogue. It's a certificate, and we call that certificate in open dialogue. This training is going on, of course, in Finland, in the UK, in Australia, in United States, and there are ideas to spread with this in different countries. And then we also have a training for people who already have a family therapy training or some other form of psychotherapy training with experience of working in families, and this mainly happen in Finland. And I'm responsible for that. Actually, I retired a bit earlier from the university. That would have been possible because I thought that I really want to focus more to create a kind of systematic support network to support the practices in different countries. And so in many ways I'm very happy of this development that has happened. And already now in this we have the ongoing training in Finland now, the second one. It's a 2 years training, is planned in a way that it's possible for people traveling from abroad, and people really travel quite a long to come into this training. There are participants from Australia, from Japan, from United States, and so on. And now we have a second class of this training, and we also have just announced the third training to start next May. This is why this is a commercial. Please apply. It's a very good training. People are very enthusiastic. I also am very, very fond of this training. There's a lot of very advanced psychiatrists who say that when they are coming nearby to retire, they want to search for possibilities of using their experiences. And it's a very inspiring idea. And now we already have 55 people who have taken or are in the training. So we really are creating a kind of network for supporting this kind of practice. One very special thing is that has happened in the UK, because in the UK there is a large research project to make. And actually this is a bit special, because this research project is called Odyssey. It's largest ever conducted research on any psychosocial intervention in psychiatry. Quite surprising. A long time open dialogue was disacknowledged. This is not relevant, this does not exist. And all of a sudden the mainstream has become interested and is supporting by grant of organizing this research to find out how does it happen in a system that is very different compared to the open dialogue idea. I say some words about these meetings. What are these meetings? Because I still think that there is a lot of these concrete ideas how to organize that makes possible the optimal dialogues. But still the question is what to do in the meetings. And first of all, the idea of these open meetings is that everything happens in the meeting. Everyone participates from the outset in the meeting to guarantee that there is a shared history, which means that the staff members do not come together before the meeting to make a plan. What shall we discuss here, and what are the plans that we propose for the patient to the treatment or for the family to the treatment. But everything is discussed in the presence of everyone. And it also means that the one who is most agitated, of course, if someone has psychotic problems, he can be very agitated. He can run out of the room and she don't want to be there and so on. But the idea is that we organize the meeting when you are mostly agitated. And you become a part of the meeting when you are. We do not, for instance, we do not wait someone to become more coherent to be able to participate in the meeting. But in the meetings, people become more coherent. It's really many, many times seen that even if people can be very agitated, but in the meeting, they start to become much more, it's possible to start to listen to each other, it's possible to start to form words for his experiences and so on. And the idea of the meeting is also that everything now happens there. All the discussion in relation to how do we understand the problem and how do we think that we should go on is discussed in the presence, and all the decisions are made in the presence of the family. And this is a very empowering experience for the family, because they see all the time what are the motivations and this and that kind of idea. What is the motivation of the medication and how this medication is expected to affect and so on. The idea of the meeting is not so much to focus on symptoms. Actually, I think that let's say the huge mistake of psychiatry historically is to have that strong focus on symptoms. Because if you only think of symptoms and that our intervention is on the symptoms, you forget everything. And actually the most important is the everything else than the symptoms. Symptoms should always be seen as in relation to the life and in relation to the experiences. And the aim is here, one formulation, to build up language and words for experiences that did not yet have words, that come out in the change of breathing or in only one word or in one ever word. We do not have better language, better word, but we do it together. And for me it means that I can, for instance, many times repeat what one is saying to have an understanding how does this word feel to me, and could you say more? So the basic question in the meetings could be, did I hear you correctly? You said that you have a control of your neighbor's thoughts. Can you help me understand a bit more? Or would you say some more about it? And would you say some more about it? It's a kind of opening to go into the story. And people say surprisingly much when they are encouraged to say some more. And they have place to start to generate words for themselves. As Mihail Bachtin said in the beginning, in the other slide that I said in the beginning, in dialogue, one who is speaking becomes for the first time the one he is for himself and for the others. And of course we realize what we are in the response of the others. Oh, okay, sorry, he was. And idea of the meeting, because this is an open meeting, we do not have any specific structure to say that this is how it's always done. In this phase we make this question, and in that phase we make that question. But it's open to the context. I'm learned to do in a way that all the team who is there is able to make question and interview. We come into the room and we sit in circle and start to discuss. Of course, we introduce ourselves. We ask what has happened when we are here, what is the history for this meeting, to know how was it for everyone to come into this meeting, which discussion can be very important, because in that way, that discussion we may have the idea of the different ideas for the family members to come into this meeting. Don't hurry. Give time and to have idea. If someone had resistance, if someone has difficulties, if someone thinks that perhaps this is not so much for me, this is for others. I was in a meeting, in a consultation in Sao Paulo in Brazil some months ago, and we met with a client. It was a part of a seminar, and we met with a client who had a very tough history at the moment, and the meeting became very exceptional. And the history and the idea of the meeting was that there was a mother and her daughter who had been psychotic for the first time 3 years ago, and now she was doing well. She had ended her studies in the university and was working. But what had happened a year ago, her sister started to make very serious attempts, suicidal attempts. And that was based on the idea that her daughter, who is now 13 years of age, when she was 3 years of age, she got a cancer in the brain. And step by step, the life is going worse and worse. And lately, she no longer can speak, she no longer can move, is totally dependent on the care of the mother, and the mother is feeling that this is unfair. I've lost everything. All my life is taking care of the child, and nothing more is possible. I want to kill myself. And when we had in the meeting, they said that she did not want to come, because her basic idea is that this meeting is for my sister. They don't care about me. And actually that's why we organized that it was stream video recorded, and the sister could follow the meeting while being at home. This also became very special meeting. After the meeting, one of the psychiatrists said that who were following the meeting, saying that I have never in my life seen something like this. I never could imagine that this could be a kind of professional meeting. There was a lot of crying, because the story was kind that you cannot start to understand the life of this kind of situation without crying. In some point of the meeting, for instance, we made questions. What about the sister would have been? What would she say? what about if the daughter would have been here and she had words? What would she say? And the mother, the grandmother said, she would say that I love you. And actually she said that the last words ever she had spoken were that I love you like universe. And of course, while dealing with those kind of issues, no one of us could follow the ideas without having tears. And then we had a lot of discussion with the team who had been doing a marvelous work. We realized that when they started to speak, they were a lot of in tears and speaking from that position they were sharing. And for me, this really was a kind of generating new language for these people who had a terrible situation in life. Actually, now I met a week ago the therapist and said that a very big change has happened in the family, and they really liked the meeting that we had. So, coming into the meeting, how to open the meeting? Open the meeting with the words of the family. And asking, how would you like to use the time? Not to introduce our agenda of the meeting. This is mainly to have the resources of our family available. If we introduce the opening by our words, we are here for that. It excludes the topics and issues which the family members may think that they want to speak. And this is a very risky idea for mobilizing the resources and opening door for topics that are not possible, that has not been possible to speak before we come into the meeting. So having this open-ended opening is perhaps the most important idea. And then we start to follow the stories and the ideas of the family. Without conditions. We do not guide in any way. We only follow. And for me, following means that I can repeat quite a lot what people say. While opening, by making this, how would you like to use the time? Usually the one who first start to speak of relevant issues in the life. In this meeting with the Brazilian family in Sao Paulo, when we made this open, first we had a discussion 9 minutes with the team, and then when I asked the family how would they like to use the time, the mother said that I'm failed as a mother. I want to speak about what did I do wrong. The deepest question that you can imagine in your life. So usually that's happened, that people immediately go into the most relevant issues. But at the same time, it's important to have space for the rest of the people, and that's why I could say that it's very. I hope that we can go on with this issue. Before doing, I would like to hear what's on your mind when you came here, and then we made a kind of circle asking what are the issues of different people. And this is not an idea to make an agenda for the meeting. Make an agenda and these are the topics that we need to discuss. But it's more to welcome, to be part of the community, communication network that we are creating here. We may speak of the issues that are put in front, perhaps usually we do not have time to go in detail all of the issues. Then the third point is that a very important part is the discussion between the team members, because now everything happens in open. In many projects, I have an impression that professionals are all too shy to speak with each other. This is a bit challenging to learn the idea, how to be open and how to speak of my observations, my thoughts, my feelings, together with my colleague when I realized that the family is there to listen. But when asking the family members, they usually say that they like very much the discussion. And when this repeat, they actually already start to wait at the point of the time when the team members start to discuss with them. And the discussion includes two ideas. Issues in relation to the treatment. What are the treatment decision plans that we need to make? And also the issues more that we call reflective comments, in which we reflect what are my feelings while listening the stories of the family. And then I share my feelings that do not need to be any firm conclusions with my colleague. And this type of discussion can really be a very important part. In this consultation with the family in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, we really had a lot of discussion with the team all the way. We actually started with having discussion with the team. In between, we had this discussion with the team in which they told about their feelings, in a very deeply being emotionally moved when they did it. And also in the end, we had a very shared meeting of the experiences in how would they like to use the idea. Some words about the reflective comments, reflective conversation is that it's very important that we speak in a very respectful way. We do not say any firm conclusions, but we think more like how to be, how has this affected me? And I make a kind of question. I wonder if this can be the situation for the father. I wonder if this has been the situation for the rest of the family. And we look at each other. We do not look at our clients in this type of the conversation, because in this way we can give place for everyone to listen in the inner thoughts what they have been looking for. And this idea to have place in the inner thoughts, it's perhaps the most important. Tom Andersen was a Norwegian professor in psychiatry who was the father of what we call reflective processes. And Tom used to say that these reflective comments are shift between listening and talking and listening position. When we interview our clients, they are talking about their life, and then when we professionals discuss of our impressions, they are in a listening position. And for Tom, this was the most important part of the meetings. Have more and more place for the inner thoughts about the idea, having reflections. And then in the end, always ask about the comments of the issues. I've been speaking quite a long time here, and now this is stuck. It says to me, stop, Jaakko, stop. I've been speaking perhaps a bit too long time, so that you may have had place into your inner thoughts or not. But what about if you take some words with your colleagues, what you have heard so far, and thereafter we can have a very short break, but take some 5 minutes of all the issues that may have come up into your mind so far. I'm sorry that we cannot be so dialogical with that big audience, so that we could have a discussion all the way through. But we will have place for dialogues, discussion, comments, questions in the end. And so I hope that please make notes for yourself of whatever issues you may have a more curiosity, so we easily can come back to those issues. And in the very end, I will go on with very shortly with the issues that I'm very occupied lately, and it's the issue of understanding the human mind. Human mind as something that is constructed in relation, and it's a very bodily process that we involved. And you may call it as it's a new understanding of human life, something that already were written, for instance, in 1890 by American psychologist William James. So it's not new in that respect, but it's new to us because we have been so much caught with the idea of looking at humans in a kind of qualities or categories of personality or identity or whatever kind of a categorization that we think is a fix, more or less fix. And based on those categories, we, for instance, also make the diagnostic categories as a fixed categories description of humans. But this is also how the modern psychology is very much based on empiristic studies and research. Instead of having the other option that William James, for instance, introduced 1890. And when William James spoke about emotions and experiences, he did not think about those being some firm quality of the humans, but he said that our feelings are our experiences are feelings of tendencies, and often, perhaps most often, these feelings of tendencies are so vague that we are unable to name them at all. But these kind of feelings, as he said, is a direction in thought of which we have an acutely discriminative sense, so that we do discriminations and justification pains of those sensations that we feel in our body. And the most known writing of William James was Stream of Life. And his idea of the human life is like ongoing stream, and when you think about stream, you never can grasp one point of the stream because it's all the time going on. And this is very much the idea that I think about these meetings in dialogues, because we are not there looking after some firm elements or some firm qualities, some firm problems or names that we think that describe the situation of our clients, but we are really looking after the sensing of what we are speaking about when the people speak about their miseries and about their problems. John Soter, my very near friend, philosopher, who very unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, was very much in line of understanding life as a stream. And he said that for family therapists, very important point that this is really like grasping the life in a once occurring event of being, in which we cannot look at repeated patterns, as for instance Gregory Bateson was the one who was doing. And based on this idea, there is a lot of new research emerged, and for instance, psychoanalyst whose name is Daniel Stern was using very strong words when he said that this is a revolution. This is a new understanding of human life, is a revolutionary. Daniel Stern was a psychoanalyst and only worked with individuals. He did not have this relational perspective, but still he was saying that we are now experiencing a revolution. And the new view of human life assumes that the mind is always embodied and made possible by the sensory motor activity of the body in relation to other bodies. So that it's something that I sense in my body in relation to the other body. And it's a very concrete action. It's not something that appears as a kind of process of maturation inside of me. And of course, this is very much the same as Mihail Bachtin was saying, that we participate in dialogue with our entire bodies. I also been very lucky because the last research project that I was responsible was focusing on this, as we call, relational mind. And we were looking at how do we participate in dialogue with our bodies in a multi-actor situation, like the meetings in open dialogue are. In our research, we had a couple who came to couple therapy with 2 therapists, between 4 persons. And we really wanted to look like what happens in autonomic nervous system, how do we respond in the affect regulation, in the nervous system arousal to each other, and of course how do we respond in the language to each other, how do we respond in the body movements and our bodily actions, how do we participate in the dance that we create with each other. Taking all this count, I have a very simple, or let's say quite naive, understanding of human life. When we come to the world, we come into the relationships. And every relationships that I have an experience leaves a sign into my body, leaves a sign into the memory of my body. So actually I'm constructed out of those experiences that I have been living through in my life. And all of them really have a sign. Of course, they are not signs that are a kind of firm categories, but they are in my sensory imagination, with the smell, with the auditory memory, and so on. And many people actually already have been speaking that instead of thinking as humans as subject, so perhaps using this intersubjectivity is a more accurate word, even it's a problematic, but I won't go to that idea. But still all the way to think that everything that happens in the intersubjective domain. If we think this newborn baby, when he comes into the world, the first thing for her to learn about how to regulate her affective arousal happens by her movements. We all know, we don't remember ourselves, but if you have your own babies, you know what has happened. If she feels some uncomfort in the stomach, she starts to make movements. And what are these movements about? They are her regulating of her affective arousal. By this movement, she can have a control of her uneasiness. But what happens at the same time by this movement is mother or father who come and calm her down. And this is very important point in the human life, because this is the end of individuality. The other one becomes a part of my affective arousal, and is always after that. The memory of the hands, of the voice of the mother who was there is with me all the time thereafter. And this is a kind of idea of this intersubjective way of life. And again, I think that when we are in the dialogical meeting, it's more or less like this, that people speak about their very heavy emotional experiences, and when they do it, they make movements. They may start to have tears in their eyes, their voice is becoming slower, all the way in their bodies. And in the response that we give, we become a part of their affective arousal, in the regulation of their affective experience with these experiences, even if we do not yet have words, and even if we do not need to aim to have words. And actually one very big idea that has been, I already taught that before, but which I've been realizing is that in this way of understanding, let's say, the psychotherapeutic work, make it more easily to access for men. Because we know that for women it's much easier to have words, to have some description. I feel so bad when you said so bad things about me. This is a kind of experience in which we think that presupposes insight and formulation, but this is a thought, something that I have been thinking. But something more accurate happens before we come into the thought of these ideas. The sensing of this has happened in my body. When I start to speak of something and all, suddenly I don't have words and I may have tears in my eyes. That is the point in which we are in the most dialogical way of action. Not so much in the stories that people tell of their lives, and of course not so much no longer in the arousal, affective arousal that the baby is doing, and while she uses all the movements. But in some points, when something happens in the conversation, and how to manage to be present is the most perhaps critical point into the dialogical meeting. We are living in the polyphony of voices because we always have many voices present in the way that are there. I also have a kind of description that I have used many times, so that we are in the voices of those people who are present in our meetings, the family members, like in this family, and then as professionals, as a therapist there. So this is one part of what we call the many voices, the polyphonic experience. But it's not enough, because every one of us have the inner voices based on the ideas that what people are speaking about. The example that I told about the family in Sao Paulo, they had a lot of inner voices of different ideas. Some of them were possible to reflect on, but some were not. And happily in this meeting what happened was that some dam was open and the stream started to stream again and to go on in the life. It's for our clients, but the same is for us as a therapist. And of course here we have a more interest of that part. Because when we become a part of this dialogical meeting, we become a part of dialogues based on our own experiences in life. We are there as professionals. We know our duties as a therapist, as a doctor, as a psychologist, whatever are our education, professional duties, ethical duties. But all the way through, when they speak about children, when they speak about being a father or mother, I'm there with my experiences in my life. How was it for me to be father or mother? If people speak about losing their, as in this case, it was a very big part of the story of losing the father and dealing with the voice of the father, immediately I start to live my relationship with my father. But we do not speak about our lives because it's the life of our clients. It's not to say that you are not allowed to say of their experiences, but of course it's in the way that we are in the dance. If I can tolerate, for instance, very sensitive issues, if I'm encouraged to go into the topic, if this man said that I have a control of neighbor's thoughts, could you please help me understand more? Or if I become scared of that, I stop that and perhaps I say, this is your illness and this is the other part of the reality. So the idea of life is having dialogue between these voices and nothing more. And this is the more or less simplicity of our practice. Here we have it. So in one way we are all the time in two meetings. We are in the meeting of the stories, of the narratives, as I said here. When people come into meeting with us in whatever kind of crisis, of course they have some concern of their lives and they start to speak about that concern of life and they have a lot of narratives of what has happened. And that's important, of course. But even more important is, from the dialogical point of view, what is happening here and now when we tell about these stories. Because the meaning of all the things that has happened before we come into the meeting arises here and now. And based on the way that we respond, the meaning becomes very different. And of course, what I hope is that the meaning is the one that is possible to proceed as much as possible, even to the most painful ideas, as with this family where the father was accused of the mistakes that he made with the children. He said that this is so painful, but I want to go on. So that we had managed to create some safety so that he could go on even if he did not like the discussion that was going on there. Again, having the words of Mihail Bachtin. Mihail Bachtin is the big inner voice in my life in many respects, because he crystallized some of the ideas so clearly. He said that the idea of dialogue is being responded. As he said that for a human being there is nothing more terrible than a lack of response. And then I know that my task in the meeting is to contribute with responses. And that's it. Actually nothing else. If we manage to respond, and if the people who are in need for help, if they have a feeling that they are respected, recognized, and listened to, they really are encouraged to go further. And this creates a dialogical relationship on the whole. There was another Western thinker that always has been many times referred. It was Martin Buber, is his name. And Martin Buber used to say that when we respond to each other, we become responsible for the other. So it's a very serious act. And responding here is not giving an explanation or giving words, but recognizing as the other without any condition, recognizing the otherness of the other. You may call that, as some philosopher would say. Okay, in a very, I come to end. This is as I said, it's a very large field, and we are very lucky to have this research project to have a more deepened understanding on how do we participate in our bodies in the dialogue. But the most important quality of the meetings becomes the question: how do we manage to be present? How do we manage to be present in the moment of time in which the most important things are uttered? And the most important things are uttered in a way that do not have usually the narrative. The narrative is important, but actually not that interesting. Much more interesting is it's the experiences that do not yet have narratives. And this list is kind of simple guidelines to me to increase my ability to be present. First of all, when we discuss in the issues, we all the way through, we make choices. We never can respond to everything what is uttered and what is said. We choose what do we respond. And my reference in choosing what do I respond is what happens here and now instead of to the story. So actually perhaps it's also the case that I listen more. It's not so much the story what people say, but I look in my eyes, I feel in my body, I listen in my ear about what happens here when something is said. If the change of voice is changing, or if there is a break in between words, or if there happens a movement, if some body movement or movement in the way that there are tears in the eyes, then I know that this is something important, and try to focus in my response to that. By saying something, could you say some more? I could take that word, repeat, you said sad. Can you help me understand a bit more about it? And then we go on. This is not to say that the narratives that people tell of their life would not be important. Of course they are important. But all the way through, to think that it's not so essential that we really choose the right topic. Because there are many right topics. And we do not need to be that worried that we do not exactly speak of the issue that we think that it's most important at the moment. And luckily, of course, there are many good ways to be in dialogue, not at all only one way to do it. The second big idea is that we follow the stories, the words of our clients, and we do not open with new issues. Of course, when this is a part of making plans of the treatment, we need to take up some issues which are not discussed, but usually I also make warning. Now I have in my mind something that we have not discussed here, but I'm very curious to hear about this and that, so that we make a mark that this is not issue that you have brought, but this is an issue that is important for us as a professional. And for me, it's very much repeating, taking some parts, some words of the utterances. You said you became very sad when father moved apart. It was a young lady, 20 years of age, who had experienced the separation of her parents 1 year before. And she started to have different kind of pains, somatic pains, and went to one doctor to another. And then this became more or less like psychotic, pre-psychotic preoccupation to her. And in the end, one doctor made a referral to her to come to psychiatric clinic about this. And in her story, he told that my parents can do whatever they want. I'm grown up and they can make a separation. But then she all of a sudden said, but that actually it was a bit sad when father moved apart. And then we stopped. You said that it was a bit sad when father moved apart. Can you say some more about it? And this is the idea that not to make new meanings, but really repeating the words to make possible for her to listen what she said. And if that happens in a safe enough situation, she can proceed by this topic for herself, by our responses that we have given. Then the third point is that try to be open to see everything that happens in our meeting rooms. And guaranteeing that things are responded. I have a very silly idea that I want to respond everything that happens. Of course I know that it's not possible, but in that way it's a kind of orientation to me that I really want to be open to things that happens in the movements, in the way of people speak, in the issue what they speak. But I don't respond in a way that if I'm in a contact with someone and then I hear someone wants to say something that I interrupt this and turn to her, but I can nod my head and say, yes, I've heard you when we go, and thereafter we have finished, I can ask, I wonder what came up into your mind while listening to us. So this is what I mean, that we can show our being listening in a very simple bodily gestures, and of course it's something that we all know about the social situation that we are involved. And it's very important to be noting the different voices, the different voices that are so-called horizontal voices that comes out of everyone who are here. But then the voices of their lives become visible not so much in the story what they tell, but in the way that they tell. Someone could be saying something and all of a sudden there start to be hesitation. Then I know that some of the inner voices are speaking here. Perhaps that's the point where I stop. You said that, can you say some more about it? And that's the way that we can open up some part of this inner voices, inner polyphony that are there, that not only look at the point from one point of view. Then it's very important that I listen to my own bodily reactions. So actually this has become more and more important. In every meeting that I'm nowadays participating, I say something of my bodily reactions. In this meeting with this family in Sao Paulo, already in the beginning I was very surprised of the very first comment of the two comments of the mother. I'm failed as a mother. And secondly, she said that I want to speak, what did I do wrong? And then I said that when I listen to you, you're saying that you're failed as a mother. I became very sad, and when I'm sad, I feel something here, and so in my stomach. And she said, yes, that's the way I think. That's the way I feel. So using this, my bodily kind of listening to what happens in my body, and also in one way or another to make that voice a part of the conversation. Then it's important to make time to the conversation among professionals. And I really would give a very concrete advice you if you are willing to do it. If this sounds very strange to you, please force yourself to do it. Take some minutes in every meeting in which you have at least some comments with your colleague about what you have learned. Even if it's not a natural part, but at least the end, to become, because it really opens up some much more space and air in the situation. In the conversation with this Brazilian family that I told, we really, as I said, we had a very long discussion with the team. There was a doctor. His name is Elvis, and there is a therapist. Her name is Cecilia, and Flavia, the nurse, who really had been doing a marvelous work about it. And when we spoke about in the beginning about what are their expectations, Elvis, the doctor, said that I have a feeling that I would like to have focus in this meeting about my feeling that we have not been enough helpful for the family. And then when we came to the discussion with each other, he said that this meeting has been very good. Now I can breathe more. And that was a very good, I really loved his response. It was not so much that some specific issue was there, but being a doctor and being a part of the team in that kind of heavy situation, you really are stuck into. But now he could breathe more and look at what happens and feel of herself, and that came out in our conversation, and the family really liked that. Then I try to be very dialogical in my utterances. I really try to avoid of making any firm conclusions. Actually, our language has been poisoned by this attribute language. Nowadays, we use attributes for everything that we do. And I really try to dissolve this language in my wordings. I don't speak attributes, I speak of doing, feeling, and so on. And then I speak, in my mind, I wonder, how do you think about it? So it's all the time uttering ourselves that waits for a response for the other ones. And this is, of course, the openness of the dialogical way of working throughout. And then proceeding peacefully and having silence and dialogue. You cannot have dialogue without silence. Silence is a part of a dialogical conversation. Silence in between the words, breaks in between one stop speaking before the other one start to speak. And that's very much happen in a dialogical meeting. And it's a bit surprise because there seems not to be cultural differences in it. This is very much possible. For instance, I work quite a lot nowadays in South America. Even if my prejudice is that Latinos are very talkative, but in the meetings they can be very silent, and even so much that this family said that they were surprised how silent they were, because they are all the time talking. But now in this meeting, what happened? That there were more breaks, there were more listening, and more ideas. And also the team was surprised that they did not speak so much. I think that the words can be harmful, and harmful in the way that if we speak a lot, so many things are hidden in a lot of words. But if you do not speak so much, perhaps words have a much more meanings, those few words that we use. Excuse me, this was a Finnish man saying, if you have not visited Finland, please go there. There you can learn about silence a lot. Okay, in the very end, thinking of this kind of conclusion that why this dialogical, open dialogue way of working is so, let's say, effective. I really don't have any doubts. It's the outcomes for it that we have shown in a psychotic crisis. We also have some outcome that show the same in a very major depressive situation. They are very different. It's a kind of new way of dealing with serious mental health problems, and it really challenges our view of life on the whole. And my proposal as a kind of explanation are these 4 elements affecting at the same time. Idea of meeting with people within a crisis, because within the crisis people are more speaking in their emotions and not so much in their rational thinking. And the more we are speaking in the emotions, the more we have possibility to open the door into an issue that has never before been spoken. Because we are not so much control of everything, but we share the emotional. And this is the idea of meeting with people in a crisis, to go into the emotional, to the feeling part of it. But it's not enough. You need to have the right persons there in your life. So having the perspective with the family, with the social network as a part of our ideas is very relevant. Perhaps this is the most decisive difference of open dialogue to any other ideas. Work very persistently with the family, with the social network. And within this social in which your mind really is created, you share something, you say something important to you, and at the same moment it may be the first time when your mother or father or sister hears something that you did not think to say before. Many times these are surprises for the siblings, so that the sisters may say that I've never thought that you have this kind of experiences of our parents when we were a child, because I had that type of experience. The third point is the idea of dialogue. When we come together in the meetings, when we have the aim of generating dialogue, we have the aim to having all the different voices becoming heard. And this is a very unique and special experience for the family members. Of course, this is a special situation on the whole, because in life usually we are not heard without conditions, but in the meetings we should become heard without conditions. And this is a very professional way of working as such. And when this happens in the presence of my other important persons in my life, even if I could be very much in conflict with them, that's a very creative experience. And then in the end, if we can manage by so doing, as we have managed to do it, to avoid unnecessary medication, we also can avoid the harmful effect of the medication. If all these elements are working together, we can wait for better outcomes. Well, dialogue is an act of love. And it's a literature researcher, David Peterson, who said in a beautiful way that there is no dialogical relationship without love, just there is no love in isolation. And this is something that I really have seen so many times with the families who say that mother can say that in this was so helpful because I learned to love my son again, with whom I had interrupted my relationship 8 years ago. And that's perhaps the most creative idea on the whole, and also the illustration that in this way of working, basic ideas of human life becomes relevant instead of so much focus on techniques and interventions. Thank you. Now we can have time for discussions or comments.
我想我们是不是再给我们那个Jaakko Seikkula博士一个很热烈的掌声？好，那我们就现在这个时间呢，我们就也来进行一个 Q&A 哈。那我不确定大家刚刚在一个早上的一个过程里面有没有什么你内在的声音想赶快先说出来的？
想请问Jaakko博士，就是在一个有这么多成员而且这么丰富的开放式的对话里面，怎么去保证让每一个说出来的话语都有机会被回应？他是要举手发言，还是要抽号码牌，还是有什么样子的一个方式可以 对，让它可以完成。
Thank you for the question. Perhaps that is some part of the idea of being alert, being open to everything that happens in the room. And in some way, of course, we pay attention if someone is trying to come into the speech, and if happens that she don't have space, so perhaps that is the point to encourage her to say how to go on. But there is also one special situation, because it may happen that we are in a meeting in which I could have an impression of some uneasy way of behaving of some participant there. So that some person in the family is speaking in a very powerful way, and there seems not to be so much place for the other ones to speak. I don't structure. I don't stop her speaking by saying that could you stop, so that other ones also could say. But I follow the idea that she has to be understood. She has to be heard. And after she has heard, she can start to listen to others. And this is a bit better way to do, with the idea that I want to construct the people to speak in their turn. And then when we meet a second time, we may realize that now in the second meeting there are people who did not come to speak so much in the first meeting. But of course, if I'm worried that someone did not come heard, I will say that if not in the meeting, towards the end of the meeting. I realized that perhaps there were not so much place to speak about the issues that we would have liked to speak about.
还有吗？
Yeah.
不好意思，我想要请问一下，因为我大概看过那个Jaakko的这本书，还有那个今天这样的一个分享。那我比较想要了解，就是说，那开放式对话基本上它是一个所谓的一个社会我比较理解的是一个社会行动的路线。那这个社会的行动基本上它不只在影响我们所看到的这些人，我们遇到困境的这些人，而是我可能同时也在改变，比如说。像我们现在，我觉得我自己会感受到最大的一个压力会来自于说，比如说这个体制，它可能要求好像你必须要吃药，你如果不吃药就是反医疗的。好，可是这里面不管是在体制上，或者是在我们专业的这些养成上面，那我想要了解在芬兰的这样的一个经验里面，我们是怎么样去边采取这样的一个社会行动，然后同时也在慢慢的去造成这些变迁和影响的，这是第一个部分。那第二个部分，我们之前在录音的时候，其实我也会开始在思考是，如果我们透过行动研究这样的一个方向作为这样的一个主轴的时候，那同样把这样的一个场景放到台湾这样的一个环境里面来。那台湾更需要我们的讨论，其实会回到一个，就是说，那台湾可能会面临到的瓶颈，除了外在的这个体制的这些限制之外，可能像华人这样的一个家族的，好，然后我们可能因为面子上的，好，所以要让这些开放的对谈，是不是会面临到更多的这些困难？那是不是我们可以开始有更多的一些发展的这些可能，或者是在地这样的一个发展出来的这个行动的方向？这只是我自己的一些想法，这样。谢谢。
Thank you. If I understood you correctly, what you were thinking with the actions, and you took the example of that the medication issue is that big. So my experience and my proposal would be that definitely would not challenge the tradition of medication as the first thing that you want to do. So it's not the case that stop the medication and start to have open dialogues. Not at all like this. But what our experience is that when we organize this systematic open dialogue, we really can come into a situation in which we can decline the role of medication But the line is that first doing something else, and then you have access to do something else, like declining the role of medication if you really would, if you want to do it. So that this is perhaps also some of the misunderstanding that is about the open dialogue, that is now no medication or open dialogue. That's not the case, but make your steps in line what you are used to do in psychiatry. But of course, because we really have seen so many good situations in which the role of medication had been declined, so it's really my proposal also to become encouraged to think about the role of medication differently after you really have created the community with the family and the other actors in the field. Then I already forgot the second question that you had. So
不好意思，我还是回应一下，就是我刚刚在讲那个社会行动那个路线，是因为我们目前的这个体制里面，常就是有跟没有。好，所以我们今天一旦提出一个，比如说从0到10，有和没有这样子，可是我们今天提出一个可能是2、3、4、5、6，好，那这个体制就会觉得你是不是要反动这样子？好，这是我自己觉得，就是说我们自己在做这个社会行动的时候，我们常常只能默默的做，不能很张扬的这样子去做。这是我自己的回应和想法。第二个部分是，那像在台湾这样的一个处在一个华人的社会文化的这样一个氛围里面，我们真正要开始去邀请大家，实际上能够这样子对谈，就算我配合他的时间，甚至我直接到他的家里面，还不见得大家能够一起再出来。所以这样子他在行动上，我觉得可能会有面临到更多需要调整和去思考修正的地方。这是我比较想要提出来回应，比较不是一个问题这样。
I would like to make a comment because I have seen in my visits here some of the families, and what I have realized while meeting with those families, that it's a very same kind of dialogues as I'm used to have in wherever. And I also have some experiences in meeting with families in Shanghai. Of course, it's a, I suppose, different kind of system, but still a kind of Chinese in that way. And actually, that's also a bit surprising conclusion to myself, because I expected that there would be more differences based on the cultural tradition in the meetings with families. But in those meetings that I have been involved, I don't see those. So that it's surprising. Perhaps some anthropologists would become interested to make a research. How come? And if there are some differences that I don't realize. But of course, perhaps the challenge is that how do we come into practice in which we have more access to work with the families. Families may also have had very bad experiences of our system, and that may be part of their rejections or scared to be part of our meetings when we invite of them. And how do we learn to make changes in the way that may make connections with the families? For us, it was really, really important in the beginning to come into the situation in which we learn to invite the families by asking their help to us. Could you come and help us? We meet with your son, we meet with your daughter, and we need your help to do it best. And when we learned this, a big part of the resistance disappeared. But of course, not everything. So that all the way through there are situations in which therapists are not satisfied that the family is not responsive.
我想那个系统的部分，是我们可以到我们下午那个论坛的部分，我们可以再多一点琢磨。那下午那一场在本土化的实践的部分，我们也可以再多一点。我们如何跟台湾的家庭做这样的工作？好，那刚刚这边还有一位。
对不起，我想请教一下，就是说，对话是怎么样的时机是最好的？因为我们刚刚有提到说是，病人比较情绪平和的时候进行比较好。 可是，一般我们在急性期的时候，是不是就没有办法进行？一定要到病人某种程度的稳定下来才可以。那另外一个就是说，由谁来 handle 这个会的？比如说，谁想要讲说，我们什么时候要开会？什么时候这个人是谁？然后在开会的时候有没有一些就是不明其实是有一个主持人在里面的这样的一个进行。那芬兰他们对病人的工作的态度是怎么样？然后在我们这个对话里面，是不是一直有延续后面的一个东西，像譬如工作啊、社会适应这些？谢谢。
I forgot what you said. Okay. First question was about the idea when to meet or should we wait to become more coherent, and really is our experience not to wait. Meet immediately after the meeting, regardless of what kind of situation the main person in concern is. Because in the meetings people become more coherent, and it's much more constructive if in the meeting with my mother and father I become more coherent, because now it's part of our relationship, instead of the situation that I become more coherent when I'm in the hospital in isolation and then I come to start to speak. And if we wait, so people are already over the most emotional experiences and they are not so willing to start to remember what was my most painful sensations 2 days ago or 3 days ago, because I already see that there is more calmness in the situation. So there are many reasons to meet with our clients immediately in the most heaviest situation. And who are in charge, you can decide. I very much like to work in teams. We are 2 or 3 persons, we all are charged, but someone has said that this is a bit chaotic. I need a structure to decide that one is in charge and the rest of the team is contributing or making comments of the ideas. And then I didn't quite, perhaps this is a cultural difference, because I did not quite follow the idea that who decide, because in decisions in this open dialogue idea are always done in the meeting, in together with everyone. And it means that the team is the one who is in charge of all the issues that are discussed. Of course, we know that in the system, it's in the end it is the doctor, but if the doctor is a part of the team, he or she can consult the other ones, and then we can go on with the ideas. Yeah.
She had the third question for.
Yeah.
所以第3个问题就是，如果
How we to keep following
病人回归社会之后，比如说他的工作、就业的状况，就是开放式对话可不可以针对后续的追踪，可以有什么样的效果？
I don't actually, of course, I don't know how to be. I think that in many places they do it in a different way. In many places they do it in a different way. How, if they decide to follow, or if not. I very much in the consultation that I participate. I really like to have information what happens afterwards.
好，那我想我们今天的时间到12点半。
Our morning session will close at 12:30. Now it's almost 12:30, and the afternoon session will be reconvened at 1:30. So please give another big round of applause to our speaker.